Story 1. I used to be one of those people who liked to explore the dark web for fun. I frequented various underground-style sites. Working in the eat industry, the dark web and the deep web were these strangely taboo topics that we weren't supposed to discuss with normal people. But it's not exactly the best-kept secret. Those of us who go out on tour and look at questionable things can almost sense others like us. It's like we have this weird sixth sense that tells us if the person next to us is someone who peruses the deep web. Okay, not really, but typically we can tell by someone's demeanor if they know what they're talking about. Most of the time, something about the deep or dark web will come up in conversation. I'm the kind of person who knows too well what I'm talking about. If something was shady, sketchy, unsavory, or in a legally gray area, I was probably spending some time each day looking at it. I spent more than my fair share of time on a few deep web community boards, mostly chatting with like-minded people who also had too much spare time. My favorite pastime was posting on conspiracy boards. It's crazy to see what people will say when there's no limit or filter. Some of the things said there may be more true than we'd like to believe. Case in point, hitman sites exist and are potentially a legitimate business. Not legitimate, of course, but the ones that aren't honeypots. Anyway, aside from that, there are a lot of marketplaces on the deep web for questionable things. The dark web, however, is where things turn downright illegal. I will admit to spending my fair share of time and money on dark web markets. I've bought things that are illegal to own and seen things I shouldn't have seen and definitely didn't want to see. That said, I wanted to write about one marketplace that freaked me out and made me pull away from the illegal stuff. There was a particular marketplace that touted itself as the be-all and end-all of dark web markets. It was essentially a massive dark web version of Craigslist or Facebook Marketplace. If you were looking for something you shouldn't have been and were willing to spend some Bitcoin, you were in luck because odds were that they had it bootleg movies, check Viagra from another country, check computers potentially stolen from a government facility, check. However, it went deeper than that. They also had services you could pay for nothing like the hitman sites, but if you wanted to have a good time with someone about to die, then you could. I don't judge others for what they do behind closed doors. I keep my opinions to myself and live my life. That said, I stumbled on something that I initially thought couldn't be real. But after messaging the seller, I wasn't so sure anymore. It could have been a honeypot or a Fed trap, but if so, it was a damn good one. One afternoon I was perusing the market, looking for something stupid. I think I was looking for shoes or something, don't ask. That's when I stumbled upon something simply labeled "New I Like New Things," so I eagerly clicked on it to read about this new product. Well, this product wasn't really a product. The description read something like, "Have access to any age up to 7 and can deliver. Forged paperwork is extra. Must have payment ready for any and all offers." Obviously, my first thought was that this was a full-on honeypot or a scam for people looking for children, which would be a niche scam if you think about it. So I mentally defaulted to honeypot. Because I was a bit of an edgy 20-something, I decided to message the seller to mess with them a bit. I logged into my account on the market and went to send the user a message. I asked something along the lines of, "How do we know you're legitimate and not a Fed trying to arrest someone?" They responded with, "Well, you don't," which solidified the honeypot idea I had in mind. I responded with, "Can you prove that you're legitimate? I have the Bitcoin ready if you're an actual seller again. I was trying to goad this person into giving me anything that would confirm my bias. They sent me a message back saying, boy or girl, and how old. I had to think for a second. I wanted to give them something tough to respond to, so I said, boy, around 5. They sent back pictures of a little boy who looked to be around 4 or 5 years old. In the pictures, the boy was happy, playing with toys in a basement area and watching SpongeBob on TV. I felt nauseous. I responded, is he the one for sale? At this point, I needed to gather as much information as I could to take to the authorities. The seller responded, he is one of them. Yes, I then asked him to prove that he didn't just send me a picture of his own kid trying to bait me. He asked my name, which I wanted to avoid. I was nervous, so I told him my name was Marcus. It's not. You don't tell people on the dark web your real name. After I told him my name, I didn't get a response for about an hour. I was almost certain he was a Fed tracking me. But he finally responded with an MP4 attached. In the video, the boy was playing with Hot Wheels. You could hear a man talking, presumably the seller. The man asked the boy his name. The boy said, Tony. The man then asked who was filming him. The boy said, Uncle. Well, the man then asked, and who is this video for? The boy responded, Uncle Marcus. The man asked, and why are we making this video? The boy laughed and said, to find a new mommy and daddy. There was more back and forth to prove that the kid was legitimate and that the seller wasn't messing around. The video ended with the seller saying, now that you can see little Tony here is very real and in need of a good loving home, let's talk payment. I prefer Bitcoin but will take any current stable coins. I'll be waiting for your response. You'd better believe I took that information and video straight to the authorities. Anonymously, of course. I know I'm a coward, but when you're a criminal taking down big criminals, it's best not to put your name on anything. I don't know what happened with the case. I assume it was passed to the FBI. I haven't been hunted down, arrested, or killed yet, so I guess things are going smoothly. Unfortunately, this serves as proof that you can buy anything off the dark web. Hey everyone, we truly appreciate your support. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing to our channel for more upcoming stories and exciting content. Story 2. I'm submitting this story anonymously for my own safety. I don't follow the beliefs or mentalities of those in this story. When I was young, I fell into a bad group of people and was convinced that I needed to hate others because of how they looked. I was brainwashed, 100%. I realize now how stupid this behavior and mindset were. But a lot of younger men out there are products of their environment, and it's incredibly difficult not to fall into these groups when they start to notice you. My anonymity is for 2 reasons. I don't want people to find and cancel me because I was an idiot, and I don't want these people to find me. I wanted to tell you about something I found on the dark web that really made me lose all faith in humanity. Back when I was younger, probably 10 years ago, I used to be an edgy 20-year-old who thought I was cool because I hung out on the dark and freaky parts of the web. I'm not proud of who I was. I used to be on some boards most people would find reprehensible and was brainwashed into certain things I no longer believe. Those boards are filled with the most reprehensible people who believe they are superior in every way. In my time on one particular board, I got in with a specific group of people. I'll call them the Knights for the sake of the story, but that's not what they were called. This group was full of supremacists and other sick individuals. While I was into the same ideology at the time, most of these guys were on a whole other level. They would discuss high-profile enemies and what they wanted to do with them. Usually these targets were of a specific ethnicity or origin, and the conversation would steer quickly towards cleansing. I stayed out of these conversations and just read what the higher-ups in the group had to say. It was never pleasant. These targets were often politicians, local leaders, various TV personalities, and the like. This group fantasized about harming these people and stated their intentions graphically. While this is sickening, it's just words. Words have weight, but if they aren't acted upon, they remain just words. Most of the time, that's what it was. Of course, after a while, some posts would morph from angry words towards celebrities to doxing people local to the posters. They would post pictures of people of different ethnicities in their yards, with a ton of personally identifiable information: where they worked, addresses, what they drove, schedules. I remember one post where a member uploaded a video of himself breaking into someone's home during the day. He mentioned in the video that he did so because he knew they wouldn't be home. He then went on to record himself defecating on their living room floor and then leaving the house. It was disgusting. While breaking into someone's home is illegal, there wasn't any real harm done to the person or people who lived there. However, things ramped up one day when someone posted a link to the dark web. Up until this point, we were on a standard deep web message board. The post said something like, "If you want to see something special, come watch this live on Streaminx." I use Streaminx as a placeholder. It was actually some weird and disgusting name. Of course, I clicked on it, thinking it would be something dumb like a flag burning or a fight. What I got was something that I don't think I'll ever forget. The stream was black at first, and I thought the link was dead. However, it popped up, and we were presented with a group of 5 guys in black clothes and masks. They were all holding various weapons and looked like something out of a creepy movie. One of the guys stepped forward, looked directly into the camera, and said, "This is a warning to all of you in power." He then said something vile about what should be done to specific people. I felt sick just hearing it. I'm going to spare you most of the gory details, but essentially, these guys dragged a bound and gagged woman into the shot. She was clearly terrified and crying. One of the men, probably the leader, started talking about her crimes against their people. In reality, she was a local politician who advocated for tolerance and inclusion. She was in no way a criminal. The stream then cut out for a moment, and when it came back, the woman was gone. All that was left was a room splattered with blood, and the 5 men standing there, their weapons drenched. The leader looked into the camera again and said, "This is what happens to traitors." The stream then ended. I was horrified and in shock. I didn't know what to do. I remember being on the phone with my friend, stammering, trying to tell him what I just saw. My friend told me to report it, but I was scared. I didn't want these people to find me. But ultimately, I couldn't just sit by and do nothing. I reported it anonymously and left that group immediately. I cut ties with everyone there and deleted all my accounts associated with them. I was terrified for a long time, thinking they'd come for me next. But nothing ever happened. I never saw any news about that woman's disappearance, and I have no idea what ultimately happened to her. To this day, I feel sick whenever I think about it. It was the turning point that made me realize how stupid and evil my beliefs were. I've since turned my life around and strive to be a better person every day. I hope that group was taken down, but I'll never know for sure. Hey everyone, we truly appreciate your support. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing to our channel for more upcoming stories and exciting content. Story 3. This story is related to one that you've told in the past. You could see it as a continuation or addition to it. I'm not the author of that story, but I have had a similar experience. The story in question is the one that you mentioned back in an older dark web video about those kids that ended up on the human meat shop. If any of you don't recall the story, first off, go listen to the video. It was about a group of kids that were messing around with the dark web and ended up on a butchery site that listed human meat. It also explained how to properly prepare it, advertised their seasoning, and gave all the information about the specific human cuts. They also touted that they sourced on demand, meaning that they had the ability to get the meat when you requested it. So they had it on standby and would kill and cut it when you wanted it. It's kind of like Wendy's fresh, never frozen promise, but for cannibals. Yeah, it was some really creepy stuff. What's even worse is that it's legitimate. I can actually vouch for the legitimacy of the human meat market. I don't know about the specific page that they were on. It could have been a honeypot, but who knows? However, there are a handful of actual pages that you can work with to get human cuts. I've spoken with people who claim to have eaten human meat, and they've told me that it tastes close to veal, but, depending on the person's fitness level, can also taste closer to pork. I don't know about you, but that thought makes me gag and want to become a vegan. That said, I actually have a bit of a story about another dark website that was similar, but it took it a bit further with its intentions. I'm not going to name the page. I don't want your listeners going out there and becoming man-eaters. Plus, it's super illegal to buy human meat, duh. There was, and probably still is, a dark website out there that is dedicated to cannibalism. However, they see it as more of a religious experience than anything. You heard that right. They see the practice of cannibalism as a religious experience. This group of people on this page firmly believe that loving thy neighbor isn't enough. You should also gnaw on their shins with a bit of Sweet Baby Ray's. Sorry, bad joke. Humor aside, I'm being completely serious. This site was built by a group of people, a cult, if you will, that held a firm belief that the ultimate act a human could perform to get closer to God was to consume their fellow man. Their ethos basically stated that eating human meat caused a change in your biology and would make you more than human. It said something about how it was basically the only way to climb up the food chain, and that the only thing above humans were gods. Thus, being more than a human made you godlike. I remember reading a lot of the information on this site and thinking, wow, these people are completely and totally insane. But they definitely hold tight to their own beliefs and don't shy away from what they taught. Like I said, this was pretty obviously a cult, and it used all the expected cult language. They pushed you to become more than what you are, talked about how their leader was given this message from God himself, and tried to gather more members through positive reinforcement of their ideology. They had a whole section where you could sign up for a meeting to come and see what their group was about, which to me felt like a method of getting more victims. But maybe they were legitimately recruiting people. Much like the other page, they had all the basics of how to prepare the meat, what flavors went best with what parts, and how to safely eat your human meat, which is an interesting thought. There was even an entire section of the page dedicated to their members and their rankings, their favorite activities. It was honestly like an icebreaker page that was made to show you that everyday people were also willing to eat other everyday people. Overall, this was a 10 out of 10 on my WTF meter. If I disappear after sending this story, you'll know what happened. I just hope that they pair me with a nice salad to balance out the meal. Story 4. Aha, New Identity. I sat alone in my dark living room, waiting for the drugs to kick in. With my back against one bare wall, I looked around my new house, a small 2-bedroom rental on a quiet street in a neighborhood far away from anywhere I'd ever been. There were a few boxes in the living room, most of them holding brand new items like lamps and yet to be assembled side tables and other household necessities for the modern suburbanite. The only light was from the street light outside, streaming through the half-closed shades. The bed I'd ordered had been delivered earlier, but it still sat in cardboard boxes. I had put off setting the bed up, thinking vaguely about suicide. I didn't want to live like this, but I had little choice. The bottle of Xanax was near to my hand, and I contemplated taking another pill. It wouldn't kill me, not one more, not even close, but it would help me sleep through the night. Only I would be groggy and unable to wake up if I needed to during the night, and I wasn't ready to let my guard down like that. I wasn't sure if I would ever be ready for that. Next to the pill bottle sat a pistol. I stared at it for a long time until the sound of a car engine pulled my attention toward the living room window. I expected the car to pass by. I could see the glow from the headlights, and I could hear the engine clearly through the single-pane windows. Getting stiffly to my feet and grabbing the pistol, I stepped over to the window and looked out at the street. A dark Dodge Charger idled in front of my house. The windows were tinted, preventing me from seeing the driver or any passengers that might have been in there. My pulse quickened, and I wondered if they'd found me. But it wasn't possible. I had a new name, a new identity. I was someone else entirely, and it was only my first night in the house. There was no way they could have found me so quickly. The vehicle pulled slowly away. Given my angle, I only caught a glimpse of the license plate, not enough to get the full number. I stood at the window, looking out at the quiet street for several minutes, then shut the shades and double-checked that the doors were locked. Then I settled back down on the floor, my back against the wall. The drugs were finally kicking in, allowing me to relax. I leaned my head back against the wall and closed my eyes. I slept in fits and starts, never once letting go of the gun throughout the night. Story 5. Watching over my son. I parked the Bronco a block away from the elementary school at 2:20 in the afternoon. I was still getting used to the new-to-me vehicle, the squeaky brakes, the worn-out shocks, and the uncomfortable seats, but it was all I could afford. I killed the engine but didn't get out. After taking a Xanax, I pulled out my burner phone and did a quick search, first looking for national news on my name, my old name, anyway. There was only a small piece about how the manhunt was still ongoing. I knew I had to be careful. For all I knew, the feds had my son under observation just in case I tried to approach him. After the national search, I did a local search to see what was happening in this new town of mine. There wasn't much to speak of. A man had been killed by police, there had been a stabbing at a local nightclub, and a gas station had been robbed. Pretty normal stuff. I set the phone down and glanced toward the school. Something caught my eye in my rearview mirror. I did a double take, looking at the dark sedan parked half a block behind me. It hadn't been there when I pulled up, had it? Maybe it was the feds, trying to get a positive ID on me before they came swooping in. I glanced toward the school again and decided it wasn't worth the risk. No matter how badly I wanted to see my son, to check on him, to see him from afar, to verify that he was alive and doing okay with his new family, no matter how badly I wanted that, I wanted to stay out of prison just as badly. I started the Bronco up and pulled out of my parking spot, cruising past the school just as kids started pouring out the doors, done for the day. A glance in the rearview mirror showed me that the dark sedan was following. My eyes darted down to the glove compartment where my pistol was. If it was the feds, I would have to give myself up. But it wasn't. I headed across town, losing the dark Dodge Charger along the way. By the time I got back to the house, I was sure I was being paranoid. If the feds were watching me, I wouldn't know it, and who else would be after me? After parking the Bronco in the garage, I decided to set up the bed. My back and neck were hurting from sleeping against the wall last night. 2 Xanax, and several hours later, it was dark outside, and I found myself sitting in the living room again, staring, waiting, thinking incessantly, yet somehow not thinking at all. My mind was socked in with a dark, impenetrable fog. Once again I heard the bass rumble of a car engine approaching and then stopping, idling. I stood up and moved to the window, glancing out. The Dodge Charger sat threateningly in front of my house. The car pulled away slowly. I watched it go. As soon as it was gone, I rushed to my bedroom and dug my prepaid phone out of my half-unpacked duffel bag. I called a number from memory. "Hey, mister." Myers, a man's voice said from the other end of the line. "How's your new identity treating you?" I could tell by the smile in his voice that he was to blame for those men in the dark sedan. A blast furnace door opened inside of me, releasing a wave of scorching fury. I only knew him as Mr. Fix-It because that was the name on his dark website. "What did you do?" I asked in a growl. "Me? I didn't do anything. You're the one who's living under an assumed name. It's just that name may not be as squeaky clean as I led you to believe." "I checked it out myself," I said, not understanding how this happened. "I'm sure you did, mister," Fix-It said, still a smile in his voice. "But that's just the thing. You're not a world-class hacker, are you? Because if you were, you would have seen more than I wanted you to see. As it stands, you're pretty much screwed. My friend, whoever's onto you isn't going to stop. Unless what? You want more money, mister." Fix-It laughed. "Smart man, Mr. Myers. That's exactly what I want. And if I get $10,000 from you in the next 10 minutes, I can make your troubles go away." "How would you do that? What guarantee do I have that you can even do it?" "Oh, no guarantee," he said. "None at all. But I do guarantee that you'll have some serious problems if you don't pay the money. So what do you?" I hung up the phone and threw it across the room. I didn't have $10,000 to give him. I'd spent most of my money setting up this new identity, which was apparently compromised, although I didn't know exactly how. Whoever was in the sedan wasn't the feds. That much was clear. So who were they? I didn't want to stick around and find out. Moving quickly, I started grabbing essential items and stuffing them into my duffel bag, trying to clear my head. I set my gun down on the kitchen counter when I'd come home earlier, thinking I should have it on me. I headed out to the kitchen, but my gun wasn't where I'd left it. I looked around, trying to remember if I'd even brought it in from the car. I could have sworn I had, but I'd taken too much Xanax. It was messing with my head. As I stopped, walked into the living room, I saw a dark figure standing in the corner of the room. I whipped my head in that direction and saw a man dressed in black and wearing a rubber Chucky mask from the Child's Play movies. He held up my gun between thumb and forefinger as if to say. Looking for this, I turned around to run and came face to face with another man dressed in an identical mask. He jammed a handheld stun gun into the flesh of my neck before I could react. As thousands of volts flowed through me, my muscles contracted and I went stiff, then fell over, unable to even reach a hand out to cushion my fall. Story 6: Revenge and Abduction. I could still feel the man's neck under my hands as I strangled the life out of him. The feel of the thick tendons standing out under my palms and fingers, the bulbous lump of his Adam's apple bobbing faintly as he tried to suck in a breath, and finally the feel of those tendons fading back under the skin, his Adam's apple moving no more. Revenge had been the only thing driving me ever since my wife was killed in a robbery. I had been out of town at the time, and our son Andrew had fallen sick. My wife Tricia went out in the middle of the night to get him some medicine, and she never returned. Of course, I never would have known who had killed her were it not for some anonymous source inside the police department. One day, not long after the murder, I got a call from someone who simply went by the name Fix-It. He'd set me up with a dark website where I could check my messages, which he frequently used to update me on the investigation. Before the police knew who had killed my wife, I did. And when they did learn his identity, they were slow to act. I already had him in the basement of a secluded home I'd purchased with Fix-It's help. The killer had used Fix-It to get a fake identity, and it turned out that Fix-It had a long history of this sort of thing. He used a variety of assumed names, and this was how he got new clients through obituaries. That was how he found me. When he saw the story of my wife's murder, he reached out to me, thinking I might be in the market for a new life. As soon as I told him what I really wanted, he seemed to think it would be best for him to help me with that instead. He had gone into the police department, posing as a potential informant for a few cases in the hopes of getting some kind of deal on charges that may or may not have even been real. In doing so, he befriended an officer who helped with the investigation into my wife's murder. That cop, a good person but a bad judge of character, had become a trusted ally of Fix-It's. My wife's killer had been evasive and elusive, but Fix-It had a knack for finding people who didn't want to be found. And now Fix-It had me. Story 7: Andrew's Abduction. After escaping Fix-It's grasp, I had learned the whereabouts of the man who had killed my wife, so I went after him. I found him easily enough. But after killing him, it wasn't over. Somehow, Fix-It had learned about what I'd done and what had been done to me. He had threatened to turn me in if I didn't help him with some jobs that had me snatching people off the street and getting them to Fix-It. He never let on what he did with these people, and I never asked. I had to move Andrew to a new place yet again. I had dropped him off at school before meeting with Fix-It earlier that morning, but I knew the feds would be all over my old place in no time. I pulled into the school's parking lot and saw the dark sedan immediately. It was parked close to the entrance. I got out of the Bronco and casually walked over to the front doors, keeping my eye on the sedan the entire time. I didn't want to give the feds any reason to think I was suspicious, but I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. As soon as I walked through the doors, I saw my son standing in the hallway, his face pale, his eyes red from crying. I could tell that he'd been pulled from class and questioned about me. The second he saw me, he ran over and threw his arms around my waist. "Dad," he sobbed, "are we going to be okay?" I looked down at him, trying to muster up a reassuring smile. "Yeah, buddy, we're going to be fine." I looked around, trying to see if anyone was watching us. It was then that I saw the two men coming down the hall, both dressed in black suits, both wearing expressions of determination. It was over. They'd found us. "Mister," Myers, one of the men, said, "We need to have a word with you." The man had his hand inside his jacket, undoubtedly resting on the butt of a gun. "Sure," I said, "but I have to take my son to the restroom first. He's feeling a little sick." The man looked at Andrew, who was still clinging to me. "All right, but make it quick." I walked quickly down the hall, making sure the men were following at a safe distance. I knew the layout of the school well and knew there was a side door near the restroom that led to the playground. As soon as we rounded the corner and were out of sight, I broke into a run, practically dragging Andrew with me. We burst through the door and ran across the playground, making a beeline for the Bronco. I could hear the men shouting behind us, and I knew they wouldn't be far behind. My mind was racing as I tried to think of a plan. I knew we couldn't go back to the house. They would be expecting that. We needed a place to lay low until I could figure out our next move. We reached the Bronco and jumped in. I started the engine and peeled out of the parking lot, the tires squealing. I could see the men running after us in the rearview mirror. Andrew was sobbing quietly in the passenger seat, and I reached over to put a hand on his shoulder. "It's okay, buddy. We're going to be okay." I didn't know if that was true, but I had to believe it. We drove in silence for a while, heading out of town and into the countryside. I needed to find a place where we could hide out for a while, somewhere off the beaten path where the feds wouldn't think to look. I had a few ideas but knew it would be risky. I had no choice. It was either that or get caught, and I couldn't let that happen. I had to protect my son. Story 8: Fix It's Revelation. As we drove, my mind kept going back to Fix It. He had set all of this in motion. He had helped me find my wife's killer and then used that to control me. I had done terrible things for him, things I would never be able to forget. And now he had put my son in danger. I couldn't let him get away with it. I needed to find a way to stop him once and for all. But first I had to get us to safety. I pulled off the main road and onto a dirt track that led into the woods. I knew of an old hunting cabin that should be empty this time of year. It would be the perfect place to hide out for a few days while I figured out our next move. As we bounced along the rough track, I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the dark sedan behind us. But there was nothing. We were alone. The cabin was just as I remembered it, a small, weathered structure hidden among the trees. I pulled up in front of it and killed the engine. We sat in the silence for a moment, and I took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing heart. "Come on, Andrew. Let's go inside." We got out of the Bronco and went into the cabin. It was musty and cold inside, but it was shelter, and that was all that mattered. I set about making a fire in the old stone fireplace while Andrew curled up on one of the dusty old couches. Once the fire was going, I sat down next to him, and we both stared into the flames, lost in our thoughts. I knew I couldn't run forever. Fix-It had too many resources, too many connections. He would find us eventually unless I found a way to stop him. I had to figure out who he really was and how to get to him. But I was just one man, and he had an entire network at his disposal. It seemed impossible. Yet I had no choice. I had to protect my son no matter what. The next few days were a blur. We stayed hidden in the cabin, only venturing out when absolutely necessary. I spent my time trying to come up with a plan, but it felt like I was spinning my wheels. Every lead I had went nowhere, and I was starting to lose hope. And then, one night, as we sat by the fire, there was a knock at the door. My heart leaped into my throat, and I grabbed my gun, motioning for Andrew to stay back. I crept to the door and peeked through the crack. It was Fix-It. I opened the door a crack, keeping the gun hidden behind my back. "What do you want?" Fix-It smiled, that same infuriating smile I had heard in his voice so many times. "Just a friendly chat, Mr. Myers. May I come in?" I hesitated, but what choice did I have? I stepped aside, keeping a wary eye on him as he entered. He looked around the cabin, nodding appreciatively. Nice place. Cozy. "What do you want?" "Fix-It," I repeated, my voice hard. He turned to face me, his smile fading. "I want to offer you a deal. You come work for me full-time, no more running, and I'll make sure the feds never find you or your son. You get a new identity, a new life, and I get someone with your particular set of skills. And if I refuse?" He shrugged. "Then you keep running, and eventually they'll catch up to you, and when they do, you'll go to prison, and your son will go into foster care. Is that what you want?" I stared at him, my mind racing. He had me backed into a corner, and he knew it. I didn't want to work for him, to become his pawn. But I also didn't want to lose my son. I had to find a way out, but I needed time to think. "Fine," I said finally. "I'll do it." Fix-It's smile returned. "Good. I knew you'd see reason. We'll be in touch." He turned and walked out the door, leaving me standing there, feeling like I had just made a deal with the devil. Story 6. A New Resolve. After Fix-It left, I sat by the fire, staring into the flames. I had to find a way to get out from under his control, to protect my son and get our lives back. I had agreed to his deal, but I knew I couldn't keep my end of the bargain. I had to come up with a plan, something that would put an end to this once and for all. I started by gathering information, using every resource I had. I needed to find out who Fix-It really was and how to get to him. It wasn't easy. He was careful, covering his tracks well. But I was determined. I spent every waking moment digging, searching for anything that could give me an edge. And finally I found something. It was a small detail, something that most people would have overlooked. But it was enough. I discovered that Fix-It had a sister, someone he cared about deeply. She lived in a small town a few hours away, and from what I could gather, he visited her regularly. It was a weak spot, a chink in his armor. If I could get to her, I could use her to get to him. I hated the thought of involving an innocent person, but I was out of options. I had to protect my son, and this was the only way I could see to do it. I made my plan carefully, knowing I had to be quick and precise. I couldn't afford any mistakes. When the time came, I left Andrew with a trusted friend, someone who would keep him safe no matter what. Then I set out for the town where Fix-It's sister lived. It was a small place, the kind where everyone knows everyone else. I found her easily enough, a quiet woman living in a modest house on the edge of town. I watched her for a few days, learning her routine, making sure I had the right person. When I was ready, I made my move. I approached her one morning as she was leaving for work, catching her off guard. I didn't want to hurt her, but I had to make her understand the seriousness of the situation. I explained who I was and why I was there, and to my surprise, she listened. She seemed to know what kind of person her brother was and wasn't entirely shocked by what I told her. She agreed to help me, to call Fix-It and tell him she was in trouble. It was a risk, but I had no other choice. When Fix-It arrived, I was waiting. He was furious, but I didn't give him a chance to react. I had him at gunpoint, and he knew he was beaten. "You're going to leave me and my son alone," I told him, my voice steady. "You're going to disappear, and if I ever see or hear from you again, I'll make sure everyone knows who you are and what you've done. Do you understand?" He glared at me, but he knew he had no choice. "Fine," he spat. "You win." I watched him leave, feeling a sense of relief wash over me. It was over. My son and I were finally free. I thanked Fix-It's sister and made my way back to the cabin, where Andrew was waiting for me. We had a long road ahead of us, but for the first time in a long time I felt hopeful. We were going to be okay. Story 1. When I was a kid, my parents used to leave me home alone sometimes. Both my parents worked and stopped getting a babysitter for me when I was around 10. I'm an only child, so I got used to being home alone quickly. I could make food for myself and have snacks, but mostly I watched TV or hung out in my room. We lived in a one-level house with a basement. It had 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a living room, and a kitchen. The house wasn't big, but it never felt cramped. I was about 12 years old when this incident happened. One night I was home alone. I don't remember where my parents were, but they had left food for me. After eating in the living room, I went to my bedroom. Around 8:30 or 9 p.m., it was completely dark outside. That's when I heard our sliding glass door opening. I was used to hearing that noise because my parents went in and out to the patio all the time. The sliding glass door was connected to the dining room by the kitchen at the back corner of the house. But 5 seconds after hearing the noise, I realized it was strange because my parents weren't home. I became very worried. I started to panic, not knowing what to do. This situation had never happened to me before, and I had never thought it could. Our neighborhood was quiet and calm. I tried thinking of who it could be but couldn't come up with anyone. My bedroom door was open about a foot. I thought about closing it but didn't want to make any noise, so I stayed on my bed. I noticed I didn't hear anyone walking around. We had wood floors in the living room and dining room, so I would have heard footsteps. My TV volume was low, so I would have heard someone. I grabbed my TV remote and turned the volume down, listening closely for another 30 seconds to a minute. I still heard nothing. I started to think I might have imagined it. Feeling slightly better, I decided to check for myself. I got up and walked to the doorway. The living room was to the right, but the dining room and kitchen weren't visible from the hallway. I walked through the living room to the dining room and kitchen but saw no one. The sliding glass door was closed but not locked. This concerned me, but no one seemed to be inside. I thought maybe a neighbor closed it. I couldn't remember if the door had been open or closed before. I walked over, locked it, and looked into the patio and backyard. Everything seemed fine. I went back to my bedroom but decided to look outside from my window. Everything seemed normal. Thirsty, I picked up my empty water glass and went to the kitchen to refill it. As I was filling my glass, I heard footsteps in the living room. Someone was definitely there. I sprinted to the sliding glass door, unlocked it, opened it, and ran out without closing it. I was terrified. I didn't see who was inside but knew someone was there. Outside, I ran to the street, trying to get as far from the house as possible. I had recently gotten my first cell phone and called my mom, telling her what happened. She called the police and my parents headed home. I walked around the neighborhood until my mom called again. My parents picked me up and we drove home, where several police cars were parked. My dad spoke with the officers, who said the intruder was gone. Nothing was stolen, but several things were out of place. We went back inside, and I was scared for the rest of the night. The guy never came back, and I never saw him again. I'm just glad I left when I did. Story 2. Something weird happened to me last week. I was having a movie night by myself in my apartment. I live alone on the second floor. My apartment is fairly new and has 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, a living room, and a kitchen. It was Saturday around midnight, and I was on my second movie of the night. I didn't have work the next morning. My apartment is at the far end of the hallway, next to the stairs, though people usually use the elevator in the center of the hallway. I heard the door to the stairs open and close. It sounded like someone was walking down the hallway. I didn't think much of it until I realized it sounded like more than 1 person, maybe almost 10. I thought it was strange but expected them to pass by. Instead, they stopped outside my doorway. I thought maybe they were going to the apartment across the hall, but it was a little ways down. Curious, I paused the movie and looked out the peephole. To my shock, there were about 10 guys standing in the hallway, facing my door. They were wearing all black with hoods, so I couldn't see their faces. No one knocked, and they just stood there. I considered asking what was going on, but thought better of it. I walked away, hoping they would leave. I couldn't feel comfortable while they were there. I tried to distract myself with the movie, but turned the volume down so they wouldn't hear it. I couldn't focus and then heard my doorknob turning. It was very quiet, but I heard it because I was already thinking about the men, and my TV volume was low. I felt even more creeped out and in danger. I stayed where I was, unsure of what to do. After about 10 minutes, I got up to check if they were gone, hoping they were. Looking out, I saw they were still there. I ran back to the couch, not knowing what to do. I didn't think I could call the police since they were just standing in the hallway. After 5 more minutes, I checked again. This time they were gone. I couldn't believe it, as I hadn't heard them leave. I was so paranoid that I kept checking the peephole every 10 minutes. Luckily, I didn't see them again. Before going to bed, I walked the hallways to make sure they were gone. I went throughout the whole building without seeing them. Finally, I went to bed around 2 a.m. However, I was woken up in the night by knocking on my door. It knocked twice after I woke up. I stayed in my bed, too terrified to get up. There was silence, and I feared they would break in. I stayed in bed for about 30 minutes before checking the door. No one was there. I went back to sleep and heard nothing more. Since then, everything has been fine.